Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the webinar, Understanding the PCI DSS version 4.1.47 mandatory requirements from the 1st of April. I'm your host today, Katie Watson, and I'll be representing CCON. So if this is your first time joining us, CCON is a cybersecurity partner committed to empowering organizations to take control of their security challenges with confidence. We work closely with our clients to elevate their people, processes, and technologies, ensuring that they stay resilient in the face of evolving threats. Today, we're diving deep into the upcoming changes to PCI DSS, with 47 out of the 60 new requirements transitioning from best practice to mandatory by April 2025, something I'm sure you're all familiar with. And this change is going to have a significant impact on organizations and how they handle payment data. We're very lucky today to be joined by Johan van Zyl, Managing Director of RiskX Data Assurance. With over 30 years of experience in the security industry, including more than 15 years specializing in PCI DSS, Johan will guide us through these compliance shifts. He'll provide expert insights on the new mandatory requirements, and help you understand how to proactively prepare for compliance. And so just before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping from our side. So we're going to run this webinar for approximately 45 minutes, and that will include a Q&A at the end. We do have a Q&A feature in Teams, so please feel free to submit your questions throughout, and the session itself is being recorded. And if you have any questions that you don't maybe want to ask on the webinar, you can email me at katie.watson@theconcyber.com. Finally, we would love to hear some feedback on your thoughts on the session, so please do let us know what you thought afterwards. Now it's time to grab your coffee, settle in, and get ready for a very insightful session. So I'd like to hand it over to you, Johan.
Thank you, Katie, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the session. Right, let's just get into it. I'm just going to share my screen, and now I need to start this thing. Perfect. Right, so we are going to talk today about these new requirements of PCI DSS version 4.1. No, it's not an April Fool's joke. There's 60 new requirements that was released with version 4.0, and of those, 47 requirements were best practice requirements, which become mandatory the end of March this year. Just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to do a very, very short introduction about myself and about RiskX. Then we're going to look at a high-level view of these new requirements. And I've got a deep dive slide. And then I've got an even deeper dive Excel spreadsheet, which we'll switch to if I talk fast enough. And then we'll have Q&A, as Katie mentioned, towards the end of the session. But please use the question functionality in Teams to raise questions, and we can deal with those towards the end of the session. Right. Well, Katie introduced me with 30 years plus experience. Looking at it, 1997, not 30 years quite, but getting close to that. So I started my career as a specialist IT auditor at Coopers & Lybrand, later PricewaterhouseCoopers, and fast forward, I'm now the Managing Director of RiskX Data Assurance. I first met PCI DSS in 2009 while I was employed in the internal audit department at a level 1 merchant in Cape Town. And, I assisted them in becoming PCI DSS compliant with a full standard. Back then, we didn't have things like point-to-point encryption that made things easier for merchants. So, yeah, and pretty much been in a very close relationship with PCI DSS since then. That's all about me. Let's talk a little bit about RiskX. So our company is made up of three companies. So we've got RiskX Group, which is the holding company. We're about 8 years young, and RiskX Group consists of two operating companies, namely RiskX Data Assurance and SecureX. I'll cover SecureX first. SecureX is one of our other businesses. They have a security operations center. They also provide managed security services, and then they are MSSP for a number of products, which include firewalls and so forth. At Risk X, we've got two verticals. We've got audit and advisory and assurance. Under audit and advisory, we have our PCI services, which is PCI DSS, PCI P2PE, and we also have payment forensics running under that. We also do ISO 27001, SOC 2, NIST, and cyber essential assessments under the audit and advisory leg. Under assurance, we have a team of highly qualified penetration testers. We also accredited penetration testing company, and we also do our vulnerability scanning from the assurance leg. Now that's it on introductions. We've got quite a lot to go through, so let's get into it. So let's take a high-level view. In October 23, I presented at the PCI European Community Meeting on the differences between PCI DSS version 3.2.1 and version 4. We unpacked the new requirements. We excluded the appendices. In the appendices, you've got 3 new requirements for shared hosting providers and 1 new requirement for designated entity validations. So we just focused on PCI DSS, the 12 requirements. So of the 16 new requirements, 13 of them were applicable immediately. Most of them were updates to policies, and there was also one where the client or the entity must confirm the scope of their PCI DSS compliance annually. Although that's not really a new requirement. If you all remember back to version 3.2.1, in section 3, it was always the intent that the entity confirmed their scope and the QSA validated that scope confirmation. Right, so let's take a look. So we've got 60 new requirements, of which 13 were immediately mandatory. So that leaves us with 47. Those 47 requirements are best practice until end of March this year, after which they become mandatory. We further break down the 47 into 40 requirements that's applicable to all entities and a further 7 that's applicable to service providers only. So what are these new 47 requirements and where do they fit in? And let's talk a little bit about that. So this is just a high-level view of the main high-level requirements where the new mandatory requirements fit in. You'll see there's 7 requirements in requirement 3. There's 2 requirements in requirement 4. There's 4 requirements, requirement 5, and sorry, maybe requirement 3 is protecting stored cardholder data. Requirement 4 is the transmission of cardholder data across open public networks. Requirement 5 is around protection against anti-malware. Requirement 6 around vulnerability management and secure development. There's 3 in there. Requirement 7, which is logical access, there's 3 ones in there. Requirement 8, which is logical access management, there's 7 there. Requirement 9, which is physical security, there's 1 additional requirement there. Requirement 10, monitoring and logging, there's 4 there. And in requirement 11, which is testing and verifying vulnerabilities, there's 5 there. And then requirement 12, which is maintaining policies and third-party management, there's 11 there. So we can actually see the bulk of the new requirements is in requirement 12. Excuse me. So let's take a look at what's under the surface. Of the 47 new requirements, 32 of them require documentation. When I say documentation, it's either policy or procedure updates, or it's documenting your protocols and your encryption algorithms and stuff in a register and so forth. 21 of the 47 new requirements do require technical controls. I've just listed the most significant technical ones here, and we'll go into a deep dive soon. So requirement 8.4.2 requires multi-factor authentication for all remote access into card data environments. This requirement is specifically important for BPOs, call centers, for that matter, that access their clients' systems and remotely and have to continue business doing phone calls and motor payments and so forth. So you need to consider multi-factor authentication. And when we look at multi-factor authentication, it's not two passwords. It has to be something you know, something you have, and something you are. So something you know, like a password, something you have, like a one-time PIN, and something you are, like a biometric. So it's got to be two of those. That's going to be an interesting one to unpack. And then the second one is the prevention of remote copy and relocation of personal account numbers. So you've got to prevent even developers, if they access a system remotely, from copying PAN data or relocating the PAN data from that system. We'll get into a little bit detail later. The third one for me is the mechanisms to detect and protect personnel against phishing. That's requirement 5.4.1. So you've got to have an automated mechanism or logical mechanism in place to prevent phishing attacks on your personnel. Then the fourth one for me is the ensuring the authenticity and integrity of payment pages loading in the customer's browsers. That's a very interesting one. We'll unpack it in a little while. It goes hand in hand with where is it? Yes, number 10, which is the change in tamper detection for payment pages. So there's a couple of interesting things we can discuss there. My number 5 one, in PCI version 3.2.1, there was not a lot of focus on application and system accounts. In version 4.0.1, there's a lot of focus. So 7.2.5 deals with application and system account permissions and reviews. Then number 6, the one that most of you may be aware of, is the password length change. It changes from a minimum of 7 to a minimum of 12. That is now if you only use passwords and usernames to grant access to systems. If you do use multi-factor authentication, that one would be not applicable. Number 7 is requirement 10.4.1.1. It's automated log reviews. So the council and the payment brands have realized that the amount of logs that's being generated these days are just humanly impossible. It's impossible to review by a human. You've got to have some kind of automation to flag the serious and the critical events and then go and look at those. But yes, you have to have automated log reviews in place. Number 8, authenticated internal vulnerability scanning in requirement 11.3.1.2. That means your vulnerability scanning that you're currently performing internally must now be authenticated. So you must have a user account with or system account, application account with sufficient system privileges to be able to do authenticated scanning on all your internal systems. Number 9 is the monitoring and detecting of COVID malware communication channels. That's in requirement 11.5.1.1. And we've already covered requirement, or my number 10, which is the change in tamper detection for payment pages. Right, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to cut over to Excel. Let me just figure out how to do this. Need to end the show here. And then we'll stop sharing this screen and I'll share the main screen and I will pull this one across. Perfect. Right, so let's go through the detailed new requirements. So we've got quite a strong compliance methodology. We've taken PCI version 4.0.1, we've put it into Excel, and we're just building on this. And if you send me an email and we get talking, I may share this with you. Right, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to filter all the ones that's applicable from end March here. And we start with requirement 3.2.1, which is to do with the storage of sensitive authentication prior to completion of the transaction. Examples would be people that have online shopping where they store the card data and the sensitive authentication data until the evening before when they pick the goods, and they then only process the customer's card. So this requirement, fortunately, is a documentation requirement. So you must just write up in the policy and the procedure how you're going to be retaining that sensitive authentication data and also how you're going to be disposing of it after the transaction completes properly. The next one we're going to look at is the storage of sensitive authentication data prior to completion of the authorization, that it must be encrypted using strong cryptography. This requirement specifically is not applicable to issuers and issuer service providers. It applies even when no PAN is present. So you must ensure that if you are going to store sensitive authentication data prior to the processing of the transaction, that wherever you store it, it is encrypted with industry recognized encryption. The next one is requirement 3.3, which deals with sensitive authentication data stored by issuers and is encrypted using strong cryptography. Again, this one is for issuers and issuer service providers only. You can either use hardware security modules, HSMs, or hashing to do that. This one is not applicable to merchants or other entities. Next requirement we're going to look at is the technical controls to prevent the copy and relocation of PAN when using remote access technologies, except with explicit authorization. Very nice addition, that, except with explicit authorization. So if you do have personnel inside your organization whose part of their job functions is to copy and relocate PAN, then you must just specifically authorize them to do that. This one goes nicely hand in hand with data leak prevention solutions that you may already have. You can also consider technologies that prevent screenshots like mobile phone applications do. I don't know, probably all of you have Netflix or Amazon Prime accounts and stuff, and you watch them. If you try and take a screenshot on that, you just end up with a black photo. So, I mean, if that technology does exist on mobile phones, I'm 100% sure it can be repurposed for use on normal PCs, so that staff can't take photos with their phones of cardholder data. Right. Next one is the hashes. So if you are going to use hashes to render the PAN unreadable, you must make sure that the full unencrypted PAN is not stored in the same system as your hash values, because then a bad actor can use the stored PAN to arrive at the hash values, and they can start reverse engineering it. If you don't use hashing, this requirement will be not applicable to yourselves. Next one, requirement 3.5.1.2, implement disk level or partition level encryption when used to render PAN unreadable. As you may be aware, requirement 3.5.1 discusses how PAN should be encrypted in databases and in tables. They do prefer database or table level encryption, column level encryption. So basically, you're just going to use the disk level or partition level encryption to protect the disks or the removable media from physical theft. Because when people logically access the database, they will have access to the unencrypted PAN if you only use disk level encryption. Right. 3.6.1, a documented description of cryptographic architecture includes the prevention of the use of same cryptographic keys in production and test environments. This is a very interesting one that I want to discuss with the council as well, because in requirement 6.55, they say your test environment can include live PAN if it's protected by the same security controls as your production environment. So, i.e., if your test environment sits inside your production environment and all the perimeter controls and encryption is in place as for your production environment, you are actually allowed to use live PAN in your test environment. So I'm just going to unpack this one a bit further. Maybe at a next event, I will share the insights into this one. But for now, you must just not use the same cryptographic keys that you use in production for your test environments. Right, we're done with requirement 3. Now we move to the transmission of PAN across open public networks. 4.2.1 talks about certificates used to safeguard PAN during transmission must be confirmed as valid and not expired or revoked. Or we can advise you is to use trusted sources, go to a proper CA and get your certificates from them and ensure that the certificates are current. The self-signed certificates that companies used to use to avoid that cost of trusted certificates from a CA will no longer suffice. It's got to be confirmable by the receiving entities as well. 4.2.1, maintain an inventory of trusted keys and certificates. So again, update your policy and procedure, and then keep the inventory of all your certificates and trusted keys that you use. So that's a documentation one. And now we're hitting our first targeted risk analysis. So the nice part about PCI DSS version 4.0.1 is that opposed to version 3.2.1, it's a lot more risk-based. For those of you that's been working with PCI for many years, PCI DSS used to be very controls-based. So they told you it must be like this, and then that's what it had to be like. But now the council has taken a risk-based approach and allows entities to do a targeted risk analysis to determine the frequency and so forth of controls. So this one says a targeted risk analysis performed to determine the frequency of periodic evaluations of system components identified as not at risk from malware. So generally, companies would ensure that they've got anti-malware solutions loaded on their Windows systems, but sometimes some Unix systems won't have anti-malware on it. So this targeted risk analysis will say, yes, okay, we are going to review it every 6 months or every quarter or even annually. And then we're going to see, are those systems that don't have anti-malware on them at risk, i.e. looking at any new malware that has been released, and then the business has to take a decision on whether they're going to apply anti-malware solutions on those unprotected systems. So this, again, as I mentioned, is not applicable if all your systems have anti-malware. If not, you say, well, we're going to review it at this frequency to see if we need to deploy anti-malware. Next one is, again, another targeted risk analysis to determine the frequency of periodic malware scans. Now, if you are doing weekly full scans of your environment, you must just write that up in a technical or targeted risk analysis. It must be in a targeted risk analysis. It won't be accepted if you have it in a policy. We do weekly scans. So the guidance is quite strict. It must be written in the TRA. Next one for anti-malware. The anti-malware scans are performed when removable electronic media is used. So if you insert a flash hard drive into your laptop, it must be scanned immediately. Alternatively, you can use continuous behavior monitoring, i.e., expected actions only. So what that means is, if you don't want to do real-time scanning, you can say, well, when an external hard drive is plugged into a machine, these are the expected actions. And if it deviates from that, you must just lock it down and block it. It's a lot easier to do real-time scanning when you insert a hard drive, by the way. So next one is 5.4.1. It's the mechanisms that should be in place to detect and protect personnel against phishing attacks. This is a technical requirement. So for you guys that don't have anything in place yet, you can look at anti-spoof controls, mail filtering, logical protection. I know a lot of companies use solutions like Mimecast and so forth that just assists from a logical perspective that personnel don't get funny URLs that they click on and get phished. So you need to look at that. Now we move to requirement 6, where you need to maintain 6.3.2 requires you to maintain an inventory of bespoke and custom software to facilitate vulnerability and patch management. Now it's very easy if you don't have any custom written software. If you only use off-the-shelf software, you don't need this requirement will be not applicable to you. But if you do, the intent is just to keep an inventory of all the custom software that you have and what types of software it uses, so you can successfully apply your vulnerability management process. Next one's requirement 6.4, deploy automated and technical solutions for public-facing web applications that continually detects and prevents web-based attacks. This is ultimately, they want you to deploy a web application firewall. Everyone's familiar with the WAF, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Here comes the interesting one. Requirement 6.4.3, manage all payment scripts that are loaded and executed in the customer's browser. Now, for those of you that's been following PCI DSS closely, you would have noted in PCI DSS version 4.0, this requirement was still partially the responsibility of the entity, even if they redirected or if they qualified for SAQ A equivalent requirements. Requirement 6.4.3 was still part of that SAQ. Now in SAQ A of 4.0.1, this requirement has been removed. So essentially it boils down to, they've realized that the responsibility for this requirement sits with the entity that hosts the payment pages. So if you redirect to a PCI DSS validated payment gateway, third-party service provider, it's that payment gateway's responsibility to ensure that the payment pages that gets loaded in the customer's browser when they type in their card numbers and their sensitive authentication data and the expiration date, those payment pages are protected. For the service providers on this call or the entities that host these payment pages on this call, you can look at content security policies, sub-resource integrity, SRIs, to do this. But, that's very time consuming. Last year, I think at the PCI European community meeting, I bumped into about 12 software providers that has specific software that deals with requirement 6.4.3, as well as the monitoring requirement we'll cover later in main requirement 11. So, there's lots of solutions on the market, and you just need to determine, is it worth your while to develop something yourself, because monitoring content security policies and maintaining them is no small task. Right, now we move to logical access. 7.2.4 requires a review of all user accounts and related access privileges appropriately. You need to update your policy and procedure to mention that you're going to review all user access every 6 months. That is the requirement. And then also you've got to document those user reviews. For when your QSA comes to your environment and do your annual validation, you need to be able to show them evidence that you've reviewed all your user access every 6 months. The next one is the first new requirement around application and system accounts. So very important, we need to assign and manage all application and system accounts appropriately. So PCI now says you must give those system accounts the least privilege and only required access for them to operate. So, if you have your system and application accounts as part of your domain admins group, you need to create a power user group or privileged user group and move them to that, because no longer can they have carte blanche access to your system. You also need to put that in a policy and also retain evidence. That is why it is a documentation as well as a technical requirement. The next one is that you have to review all application and system accounts and related privileges in line with the targeted risk analysis. But, so I've written a little piece here, so if you have if you don't allow interactive logins, your review frequency can be less than 6 months. But if you allow interactive logins with system and application accounts, maybe consider every 6 months. Interactive logins, maybe just that is basically if you have your backup system account, I can use the backup system account and the password to log in from any computer. If you prevent that, then you don't have to review it as rigorously because you're actually controlling that only the system can log in. Let's see, what's the next one? Is as discussed, we're now moving to requirement 8 is the minimum complexity of passwords. So that moves from 7 to 12. But if you have MFA multi-factor authentication in place through Microsoft Authenticator and so forth, this one would be not applicable to you. Okay. Next one, 8.3.10.1. If passwords and passphrases are the only authentication factor used, you must change your customer passwords every 90 days. So this one is quite an interesting one. It's for customers that access service provider systems. Many of you may access your service provider systems, have a login. So if you do not use multi-factor authentication, your service provider must ask you to change your password every 90 days. You can consider other things as well, real-time analysis, i.e., the login time, the login location, etc. If you're the service provider of the login. So if you see the customer sits in UK and only logs in during this time of the day, if you get a login from deep dark Africa at a very funny time of day, you just flag that and deny the login and you block it if it's suspicious. But it's easier just to change. Next one, that's the nice one, 843, multi-factor authentication for all access into the CDE. This is not for your system and application accounts and point of sale accounts. As I mentioned, it specifically impacts BPO service providers because I do know that they log into their customer environments remotely. So, just consider speaking to your clients and discussing what multi-factor authentication you are going to deploy. Next one, 8.5.1, multi-factor authentication systems are implemented appropriately. Great. So yes, we've got multi-factor authentication, but it's prone to replay attacks. So just make sure you use something that is replay proof, like one-time PIN or Kerberos tickets that expire, along with a password. Then you should be fine. You can also go look at NIST 800-171 controls for more details on that. Requirement 861, we'll just see how much time we've got left. I need to get going. Manage interactive logins for accounts used by system and applications. I'm going to start going a bit faster. So 861, 862 is the passwords used must be protected against misuse. 863 is the passwords must be protected against misuse again. That deals with the password length and so forth. If you write GPO, if you use Windows Active Directory and you prevent system and application accounts from logging in interactively, all three of these would be not applicable to you. So you can see there, don't allow interactive logins by system accounts. You've dealt with all three. Okay, you can create special security groups in Active Directory and you can put those service accounts in there and you just disallow interactive logins, and all three of these are done. If not, you've got to look at a bit of detail. Like for instance, this one, you've got to change the system accounts to 15 long complex passwords that change every year, which does sound like it's going to become a nightmare, right? Especially if you've got many systems where you need to track and monitor all these things. So just create a group. When you create that privilege user group and say prevent interactive logins, and then you should be gold. Next one, 9512. Interesting one. This was already a requirement in PCI version 3.2.1. This just says you need to draw up a targeted risk analysis to determine the frequency of the periodic PII device inspections. So while the previous standard says you must inspect the devices for tampering and substitution, they now want you to draw up a TRA just so that you can say, well, for my devices that sees lots of customers pass by, like a till point or self-service device, my frequency of inspections are going to be more regular than devices, for instance, that's just like sitting in the admin office and that is taken to the floor when the other devices fail. Right, audit logs reviewed, and we now skip to requirement 10. Audit log reviews are automated. We talked about that. So deploy a SIM solution or contact a service provider to review your audit logs for you. If it's not your business, I would lean towards a service provider. But if you do have a security team and they are using something like Slack or something, and you guys are doing security incident and event management, you can just use your own solution. Next one, again, no comment. Another targeted risk analysis performed to determine the frequency of log reviews for all other system components. So the frequency of card data environment log reviews are specified by PCI DSS. This now goes a bit further and says, your out of scope systems, you need to show us that you review those logs as well. 10.72, failures of critical security control systems are detected, alerted, and addressed promptly. Currently, this is a requirement for service providers only, requirement 10.7.1. From 1 April, it becomes a requirement for all entities. Then failures of critical security controls are responded to promptly. That's your incident response process, and manage all other applicable vulnerabilities in requirement 11.3.1.1 must be managed. So in the past, entities for the internal vulnerability scans, they only had to fix their critical and high-risk vulnerabilities. Now you have to have a process in place that you look at the mediums and the lows, because if you leave the mediums and lows for too long, they could become high and critical. Right, we've talked about internal vulnerability scanning. So just when you create that user for your vulnerability scanning, pop that in the privileged user group and don't allow interactive logins. So it's not necessary for that to have administrator level access, but it must be able to access all systems. We can talk afterwards if you need more guidance on that. Then 11.4.7, multi-tenant service providers must support their customers for external penetration testing. So either provide a redacted pen test report or allow your customers to pen test your environment. It's quite simple. 11.5.1.1, COVID malware communication channels must be monitored, and it must detect any suspicious activity and so forth, either through IPS, intrusion prevention system, or IDS, which is detective. So you can apply it. It focuses a lot on DNS egress. So if you have to have outgoing DNS traffic, just specify exactly what the business requirements are and what the expected ones are. If not, just automatic block it and ignore it. Or if you are going to do it manually and alert yourself, just make sure that you incorporate it into your incident response plan and procedure. Right, change in tamper detection mechanism deployed for payment pages. Again, that's for the entity that hosts the payment page. You can look at monitoring changes to content security policies if you use that. But again, as I did mention earlier, there's many solutions out there that deal specifically with requirements 6.4.3 and this 11.6.1. It may be worthwhile looking at that. Now we go into requirement 12. You'll see there's a whole 11 here, but I mean, they go quite quickly. A lot of TRAs. So 12.3.1, you've got to document TRA around for every PCI DSS requirement that uses customized control objectives. right? And they change that slightly. So basically it says, each PCI DSS requirement that provides flexibility on the frequency around performance must be documented in DRA. So this is a catch-all for the ones at the top. Then 12.3.3, all your cryptographic cipher suites and protocols in use must be documented and reviewed. Basically, the intent behind that is that you have these documented, so when you become aware that one of your current cipher suites or protocols have been compromised, you must have a plan in place to migrate to a later version. So that's why this one is there. 12.3.4, hardware, software technologies are reviewed. Exactly the same reason, document them. And if one of them are compromised or reaches end of support, you must have a plan in place to migrate to something that's adequate. PCI DSS scope is documented and confirmed. There's a bit more, at least once every 6 months. That's a new requirement for service providers. Normal entities like merchants only do it once a year, but from 1 April, service providers have to verify their scope every 6 months. 12.5.3, the impact of significant organizational changes on PCI DSS scope is documented and reviewed, and results are communicated to executive management. That is, for instance, when a company purchases a company and you're now part of a bigger group, just document those things and see if your PCI DSS scope changes. That's also applicable to service providers. Security awareness program is reviewed at least every 12 months and updated as needed. New requirement. We never had to review your security awareness program, but now it needs to be reviewed and updated with changing threat landscapes. 12.6.3.1, the awareness training must now include phishing, use of, that's the next one, phishing and related attacks and social engineering. So update your security awareness program to include that, i.e. train your staff a bit on that. And then 6.3.2, the security awareness training must now also include your acceptable use policy. So remember in 3.2.1, you had to have an acceptable use policy. Now your awareness program must include sections of that policy. Requirement 12.10.4.1, again, another target risk analysis is performed to determine the frequency of training for incident response personnel. In the past, was train them every 12 months, but then, they probably realized that the SANS training, however good it is very expensive. So you probably won't go and send all your incident response personnel on SANS training every 12 months. So just do a targeted risk analysis, say, the expense versus the benefit versus, how often it changes. You maybe going to do it every 2 years or 3 years. Right. Nearly there. Second last one. The security incident response plan must now include alerts from the change in tamper detection mechanisms for payment pages. Again, this is like a repeat of a previous one. If you use IPS to do this, it doesn't need to, because it's going to be automated. If you use intrusion detection systems to detect any changes to the payment pages, then you must include it in your security response plan. And then finally, the last new requirement that's applicable from 1 April is that your incident response procedure must now include procedures for when you detect PAN where it's not supposed to be. So let's say you scanning your file service and whoa, you come across an Excel file that contains 2000 PAN. You must immediately enable your incident response process, and you must figure out how it got there, who put it there, and contain it basically, make sure that nothing was exfiltrated from your company, and then also put in controls to prevent it from ending up there where it shouldn't be. And that's it. I can now switch back to this one. Stop not sharing. Great. I think that concludes presentation. We can, I don't know how much time I think we've got about 15 minutes left, or did I talk the whole time, Katie?
That was a very good and very in-depth overview of PCI and the changes. I think for those of you who do need to go, please feel free to go. If you're okay to stay on for a little while longer, Johan, we do have some questions to go through. And if you need to jump and you can't get your question covered, please do just email them to me. But we do have some questions from Rui. So one question is for 7.2.5.1, can access requests that are authorized for X amount of time, limited to a year, be sufficient as evidence?
Oh, I need to go for 4. So for 4.7.
For so for 7.2.5.1.
7.2.5.1.
Yeah.
It's basically the access requests. For 7.2.5.1 deals specifically with the application and system accounts, right? So maybe just read the question again that we
Yeah, of
just
course.
quickly.
So for 7.2.5.1, can access requests that are authorized for X amount of time, limited to a year, be sufficient as evidence?
Okay, so 7.2.5.1 deals with a review of application and system accounts, and that their access must be reviewed maybe every 6 months. So if you have an access request and you've granted somebody access to a system account to use for a year, I'm sure that would be acceptable as long as it's on a written form or access request form that's been authorized by management and so forth.
Brilliant. Hopefully that answers that question, Rory. And then we do have, it's got a comment. Someone or an application.
Someone or application. I think we need to differentiate between the user access and the application and system accounts. So I think for users to access, that's something that can be dealt with that. But if you have somebody that's using an application or a system account, you shouldn't actually have people logging in with application and system accounts. So we can always catch up and look at that in a bit more depth via email after this session.
Brilliant. I think that's a great suggestion. After this session, what we can do is, because I'm cautious, Rui, we might not be able to get to your other 2 questions. After this session, we can reach out and go through them via email and maybe organize a call if it helps. Before we do wrap things up, does anyone else have any other questions? I'll give you a minute to put them in the chat. But if not, I thought that was a really helpful overview, Johan, and it really did show the actionable steps that we can start to take as individuals to start to secure our businesses more. So thank you so much for your time today and just sharing all that knowledge with us. Thank you to everyone who attended, and hopefully we'll see you at our next webinar, which will be on the 11th of March, which is going to be about asset management and going from blind spots to strongholds, how asset management strengthens cybersecurity defenses and ensures compliance, which some of you may also be interested in. So thank you everyone for your time today. Johan, would you like to say anything else before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think thank you for coming to listen to this boring old man. I hope you enjoyed the session, and look, as I mentioned at the European Community Meeting during my presentation, it's nothing new. We all see that we are moving to a more controlled, secure environment. We all know about the emerging threats, and it's been, I would say it's not doubling. It's just increasing so much. And I think the council really did a fantastic job here with version 4.0.1. They're a lot more clear and a lot more concise about what they require to be done to protect environments. And not just because it's our business, but I do applaud that they've adapted to the changing risk environments. And good luck with getting these things in place.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. You're just a wealth of knowledge on this call. So thank you so much. I hope everyone else has a great day and good luck with their PCI. Feel free to get in touch with any more further questions or any feedback. And yeah, I hope everyone has a lovely day. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.